Good evening, Rotarians and colleagues in peace. I am Jim Halderman, the chair of the District 5450 Peace Committee, and we are the sponsors of the Forum for Discussion. So as always, I'm very excited to have Dr. Lester KURTZ with us this evening. Lester is an extensive background, both in religious studies and sociology, teaching courses in violence and nonviolence, peace and conflict, social movements, comparative sociology and religion, and global social thought. He's the author of many books, editor of many more, and articles including Gods in the Global Village and The Nuclear Cage, which received the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion Distinguished Book Award. Gods in the Global Village was translated into Chinese along with other languages. So his full bio and listing of writings, lectures, and awards is quite extensive. And I assume all have read his short bio, so not to lose any more time, Lester, the screen is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Jim. This is a real privilege for me to be here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. I have what like half an hour to tell you everything I know. So I'm gonna like rush through a bunch of slides, and if you want to go back or have some questions about something, we can do that. I'll try to. If I go on too long, somebody just yell or put up there. Catherine, you can tell me if I'm. Catherine's an old friend of mine. She can tell me if I've gone on too long. But this is real exciting, and I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about how we structure violence really well. We've gotten very good at it for the last 5,000 years or so. We've honed it. We've developed institutions and rituals. We spend more money on it than any other single thing. The largest block of capital in the world is the Pentagon budget. Now it's almost $1 trillion, which is about 37% of the world's military expenditures. And we have this huge arms industries, the global arms industries, the private arms industries. People, again, the U.S. does very well. We must be number one. That in terms of the amount of money we spend on private weapons. I should have looked up statistics on that. I didn't think of it until just a little while ago. But I'm a sociologist, so I'm real interested in social structure. And so I'm thinking a lot lately about, so how do we structure nonviolence? We're very good at structuring violence. And social structures, they're kind of like, fish in the water. You don't pay much attention to the water, but we live in all of these. We've structured our daily lives, and especially modern society, where our social structures have moved from more familial village, the sort of close face-to-face relationships that get regularized, and now we've constructed these huge bureaucratic institutions where we're further away from the decision makers and we're further away from the people we interact with. And so a lot of the structures of nonviolence are actually in these day-to-day social bonds, day-to-day relationships, and so on. But also we have a lot of institutions, especially NGOs, and here, part of why it's so exciting to meet with you folks is because, Rotary, you folks are already structuring nonviolence, right? This is one of the major things that Rotary does, and you can teach me about that as we go forward. So let me jump to my slides. And again, I'll try to. I was going to try to pare them down. I had trouble deciding, what to leave out. but I won't spend that much, part of one of the main things I've done in my career is I edited an encyclopedia of violence, peace, and conflict. And the third edition came out a couple of years ago. And by the way, if anybody's interested, take a look. It's on Science Direct. If there are any of the chapters you're interested in, just shoot me an email and I'll send you the chapter if you don't have access. The encyclopedia costs like $2,400, but it has individual chapters. The whole thing is available online. I spent a year in India studying Gandhi and Gandhi's legacies. And one of the things I came away from, I think this is kind of Gandhi's model for dealing with violence. I'll say more about how I came up with this idea of the web of violence as a kind of metaphor for thinking about how violence works. But Gandhi has these 3 steps that I think are helpful: listen, analyze, and mobilize. Right. So you may recall when Gandhi came back as a hero from South Africa, they tried to enlist him. If at least you've seen the movie, right? They tried to enlist him in the independence movement, and he said, I don't even know India. He'd been in South Africa for 15 years. Before that, he had studied law in the UK. And so he spent a year traveling around the country just listening to people. And this sort of idea of doing the research first was something that he emphasized in all of his campaigns. And so you listen first, and then you begin to analyze. And then you have to figure out how to mobilize. I love Thich Nhat Hanh's idea of deep listening. And for him, it was kind of spiritual practice, and as well as an interpersonal habit of actually listening. But we have a lot of tools. We have traditional wisdom. We have social science research as a way of listening. Right? We have artistic imagination that a lot of artists who have a sense of empathy and that can express what's going on out there in the world that like the social scientists might miss. And then we have all the technologies like the Zoom that connects us in a radically new way. So then we move to the analysis. Once we've gotten a sense of where the problems are and what people's real grievances are, once we've listened. And so we're talking about Johann Galtung. Probably most of you know what the classic Johann Galtung's violence triangle. And this was a great breakthrough. In fact, it still could be a breakthrough for a lot of people's thinking that what we usually think of as violence, he called direct violence. Things like war, physical assaults, political violence, even psychological trauma. That's the direct violence. That's the tip of the iceberg, right? But underneath the surface are 2 different kinds of violence. Structural violence. This is the harm that's caused by the way society is structured, distribution systems. Deprivation of human needs, lack of nutrition for a vast number of people in the world. And so this kind of, and there's this concept of cumulative discrimination, which I love, even though it's from an economist. That sometimes it's hard to see discrimination, the sort of particular acts of discrimination, but people are discriminated against from birth, or maybe before birth, right? And this sets up a trajectory for people's lives if they're suffering from discrimination from the time they're born into a poor family, usually a family of color, especially. Then we have cultural violence, and Galtung talked about structural violence in 1969. 1990, he broadened to talk about cultural violence, which are the cultural themes that justify and legitimate both structural and direct violence, right? So, racism, ethnocentrism, sexism, we know all the themes, right? So these legitimate doing harm to other people, either by, institutionally through structures or directly through direct violence. And I added eco-violence, violence against the environment, which was not as much of part of our consciousness in 1969 or 1990 when Galtung was writing about his triangle. Then I also I had written edited a book with one of my graduate students when I was teaching about the nuclear threat, and my TA was she was studying sexual assault. And we started looking at, okay, what are the similarities and differences between violence at the interpersonal level and violence at the global level in the nuclear threat? And so we developed this idea of the web of violence. And I came back to it. I thought I'd gone from the triangle to a diamond, right, by adding eco-violence, but it seemed kind of static. Whereas the web, we're weaving together these different kinds of violence. They all interact with one another, right? The physical direct violence helps to promote cultural violence. All the atrocity tales. We see exactly what's going on in between Israelis and Palestinians, who can point the finger back and forth, escalating, forever, right? So far. So then if we start looking at structural violence, we look at, and this comes out of the nonviolent civil resistance school, which Catherine could tell you more about than I could. There's this Canvas core curriculum that I love using in my social movements classes to help guide students through their analysis of creating a strategic plan for a social movement. But one of the places to start is what holds up the existing system. So we have all of these institutions that hold up the system, and they promote violence in certain kinds of ways, right? Police, military, and security forces, obviously, but even the civil service, the bureaucratic institutions that run the government, educational systems, schools, universities, think tanks, organized religion and cultural institutions. Obviously, the media. You know all of this, right? We have all this knowledge about it, but the idea is sort of to begin looking at it systematically, and then cultural violence. This comes out of this is the kind of framework I use to deal with religion and violence. It comes out of my study of Gandhi. And there are these two themes, contradictory themes, that run through all the world's religious and ethical traditions of the warrior and the pacifist. The warrior believes they have a sacred duty to fight, pacifist a sacred duty not to harm. And Gandhi puts these two contradictory ideas together with the nonviolent activist who fights like the warrior but avoids harming like the pacifist. Whoops, I almost started. I don't have time to play. There's a wonderful rap song one of my students wrote when I taught a course on Gandhi back at the University of Texas years ago. So then what I started thinking about was, like, how do we move from this web of violence to a web of nonviolence? And so we've got to flip the violence diamond or web, and then we can think more about how nonviolence is, what nonviolence is like, so that we can think about, okay, how can we structure nonviolence as effectively as we structure violence? So direct nonviolence is the nonviolence that we see. Right, like direct violence is the kind of the violence that we see. So we see the civil resistance, nonviolent movements, protests, persuasion, non-cooperation, nonviolent intervention, sit-ins. This is the direct nonviolence. But there's also structural and cultural nonviolence, right? Structural nonviolence has to do with creating systems, structures that provide justice, equality of opportunity. We have peace systems. One of my favorite examples is Bhutan's gross national happiness. The paradigm for the economy that's focused on happiness and well-being of the people. And then cultural nonviolence, again, we know all of these ideas, right? Peace cultures. We have societies that have almost no aggression or violence, right? The anthropologists have been studying peace culture. There's a big UN project on that a number of years ago. But these cultural themes of love, justice, equality, well-being, empathy, and so on. And then, of course, eco-nonviolence, sustainability, right? And deep ecology, deep use of resources and so on. So direct nonviolence, we have the idea of the nonviolent activist, what Gandhi called the satyagrahi, holding fast to the truth, right? Satya is truth. And so Gandhi was trying to address direct nonviolence with his campaigns, nonviolent campaigns to get rid of the colonial system, especially in India. But then Gandhi also addressed structural and cultural nonviolence in pretty profound ways as well. So back to the gross national happiness. I don't know are you all familiar with gross national happiness? I've become really intrigued by that.
Some of us will be, some not.
Okay. So, well, if I had another, couple of hours, we could talk about that. I happen to get drawn in. One of my students at the European Peace University happened to be, he was from Bhutan, and he called me up one day and he said, we've been asked to organize a high-level meeting at the UN on happiness and well-being. He said, I need advice. This is a young guy just out of school, right? He had a master's degree, peace and conflict studies. I said, well, you asked the wrong person. I don't know how to organize a high-level meeting at the UN, but it was an extraordinary event that where this gross national happiness idea really grabbed a lot of attention from a lot of high-level speakers from like almost everywhere but the United States, and then at the end, then we had 3 days of meetings afterwards. Okay, what do we do with this? And I ended up kind of committing myself to teaching a course. Right, this is what I do. Right. That's what I get paid to do, right? So I said, I'll teach a course. So, well, then I realized, well, I can teach. We have social problems course on the books, right? We always need somebody. Every sociology department has a social problems course. So I thought, well, I can take Bhutan's framework and use that to teach social problems. And at Mason, it's social problems and solutions. I love the title of the course because it includes solutions, not just the problems, but we have to move towards solutions. So gross national happiness, it talks about fair distribution and sustainability are the two big pillars of their system. And the economy is supposed to be organized around fair distribution and sustainability. And so we have this, we all know about, this incredible crisis. Well, I was teaching the climate crisis. So I was teaching the course when Russia invaded the Ukraine. I thought, well, there's one piece of the puzzle that Bhutan's framework doesn't quite work. So I added this problem of violence and war. And again, we're always looking for some kind of solutions. Well, again, this is, I'm going to try to make this real simple. If anybody wants to come back to it, I'd be glad to talk more about it. Or if anybody wants more information about my thinking on this, I'd be glad to send them. I just have an article where want to outline some of this. So actually, I was teaching a course on conflict at the European Peace University many years ago. And the course was called Theories of Conflict. So I was trying to think, okay, how do we transform conflict from violent to nonviolent? And I was trying to come up with some kind of framework that makes us look at all the pieces of the puzzle, right? So you start with the journalist questions. Actually, I started with Aristotle's four causes, but that's kind of irrelevant. Because the journalists did that. Who, what, how, when, why, where. So those are kind of the causes of conflict. And then we have these different dimensions, the social psychological, the reciprocal, which individuals and nations do engage in, right? The institutional, what is the role of institutions? And then what are the symbolic or ritual aspects of conflict? And so you sort of look at each one of those dimensions across all the questions. And by the time you're done doing that, you have a pretty good sense, I think, of sort of how a conflict started, what are its consequences, and where are the places where we can begin to move the way in which it's carried out, nonviolence. So back to the web, I started thinking about, okay, if we begin thinking about, like, what are the social psychological aspects of nonviolence? How can we, like, things like nonviolent communication? I'm working with Dr. Kundu at the Gandhi Smriti in India, whose his thing is nonviolent communication. So there's that social psychological aspect of it, and how do people reciprocate? There's a kind of built-in escalation to reciprocation. If someone hits you once, you want to hit them back more than once, right? But the same thing is true of nonviolence, right? If someone gives you a gift, you feel an obligation to reciprocate, right? So the positive things can also escalate. So if we begin thinking about then the institution, how do we construct institutions that promote nonviolence, and what are the symbols and rituals that promote nonviolence, that help us structure nonviolence? So direct nonviolence, this is the social movements, right? There's this great kind of classic article, Nonviolent Civil Resistance, Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan. Erica she was in an ROTC program, and she came to one of our workshops on International Center for Nonviolent Conflict that Catherine was also involved in. And she came, real cynical. Well, yeah, there are a lot of good stories about nonviolent movements being successful, but violence is what really, makes things work. And so Maria Stefan came up to her and said, well, if you really believe that, why don't you study it? And ICNC gave her a bunch of money. She created a database that compared violent and nonviolent movements. It turns out nonviolent movements are actually more effective. And so she has this massive database. Now she's developed a new one. The bottom line is the number of people who get involved. These are studies of large nationwide struggles, campaigns to bring down a dictator or get rid of foreign troops or secede. And so she calls it the 3.5% rule. Among all of these, they had 323 campaigns from 1900 to 2006 that they looked at, violent versus violent and nonviolent campaigns, comparing the two. And it turns out that any large-scale campaign that got at least 3.5% of the national population involved in the movement was successful. And all of those movements that reached that level were nonviolent movements. So a lot of it just has to do with the amount of people involved with this sort of mass mobilization. And of course, it's much easier to mass mobilize nonviolence than violence, right? Unless you've got a military. So there's almost a direct correlation between the success of these campaigns and the number of people involved. So we need to begin thinking about what kinds of institutions, how can we construct nonviolent institutions? So we have things like the peace brigades, we have peaceful societies, anthropologists we're studying, we have restorative justice systems, we have transnational institutions like the Rotary Club, even the United Nations, the regional governments. I mean, until Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the European Union, after centuries of battle, European Union managed to avoid war among these very different countries because they saw the common interests. And then we have judicial infrastructures, things like the International Criminal Court, and then the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. So we can begin thinking about how we structure nonviolent alternatives, looking at these social psychological reciprocations. Gandhi says, for example, separate the doer from the deed, right? You condemn the behavior, not the person. I don't know about you, but I've been struggling with this lately, given our current political situation in the United States. It's hard to love your enemy, right? But if you can, have some empathy, try to figure out where they're coming from, you're going to be better at changing the behavior and the conditions that you're engaged in. Cultural exchanges. Epistemic advantage. I was going to try to quit at half an hour. I'm almost there. I'm calling it my grand finale research project is global social thought. That is, and it grew out of an anti-racism workshop in the 90s in Texas. And the idea is all of our knowledge base comes from Western dominated sources, right? Mostly European. So all the modern social sciences and even the humanities to some extent. So I organized this course. I call it non-Western social theory. Then at Mason, they wanted me to change the name to global social thought, which is probably better because I'm so steeped in the Western stuff. There's actually kind of a dialogue that I'm engaged in between my Western training and trying to read. So in the course, we read only non-white, non-Western, global South authors. So we had this one article by an Indian feminist woman scholar who picked up on W.E.B. Du Bois had this idea of double vision, but the African Americans understand both their world and the white world, because they work in the white world. The white people only understand their world. They don't understand the African American world. And so there's this sort of double vision. Well, this is kind of evolved in some feminist theory about the epistemic advantage. Also, women have an epistemic advantage. So I passed out certificates the last day of class in our global social thought class. I said, you are now certified as having an epistemic advantage from having taken this course, because you're not just reliant on all this Western dominated literature and science. But you have all these streams of thought coming at you from South Asia, East Asia, Africa, Indigenous America, Islamic tradition, and so on. So that's the epistemic advantage, which you have when you're dealing with you have a broader knowledge base. Institutional issues. What are the social bonds? How can we enhance these social bonds that bring people together? How do we have better nonviolent infrastructures, strategic civil resistance campaigns? How do we develop deterrence as something that's, I think nonviolent deterrence, actually most people don't engage in violence because of social bonds, right? So how can we rethink deterrence so it's not a matter of just like whacking people who commit acts of violence? The idea of cumulative I talked about cumulative discrimination. What if we have cumulative nurturing? Oh, I forgot the ritual part, the last one. What rituals? Peace cultures, repertoires of nonviolence, aesthetics of peace, global gathering, transcultural meals. A Russian friend of mine who now no longer lives in Russia posted on Facebook one day. She said, "This is what the Ukrainian-Russian border should look like." And there was a table that like went off into the hills, it sort of like went off into the horizon, and people sitting and eating together on the two sides. She said, "This is what the border should look like." There's been this incredible explosion of NGOs over the last few decades. You're more familiar with that. I keep coming back to gross national happiness, and I can't play you I don't have time to play the thing. Cultural nonviolence, building peace culture. The anthropologists have done a lot with that. Low conflict cultures. Douglas Fry has work on peaceful. He has an online encyclopedia of peaceful societies. Cultural nonviolence. The aesthetics of resistance, and I think I'll stop here so we can have more discussion. In years ago in Austin, I was introduced to Clifford Antone, who had a blues club. He never graduated from college. He always wanted to teach a course on the blues. And he was like an encyclopedia of the blues, right? So someone introduced me to him, and we taught a course together. We call it The Blues, Race, and Social Change. And the kind of major theme was that the blues really set the stage for the civil rights movement. You know, the blues clubs were one of the few places where white people went to be with black folks, right? In this incredible, I mean, every institution was segregated, right, in American culture. And then it sort of, the blues kind of morphed into rock and roll, right? And this was the great magnet of young white people being introduced to and mainstreaming African American culture in the United States. And so this was a kind of a huge thing. Well, I have this back burner book on the aesthetics of resistance. You know, looks at how the role of music and arts and culture. We have bonding rituals and cultural peace building. Ideas like Ubuntu, right? Which Desmond Tutu made significant. And I love this poster that someone put together. Almost every religious tradition has something like the golden rule in it, right? Okay, I said I was going to stop there. So there we go. There are the rest of them. Let's talk. It does
May I
say
make
discussion
one observation?
Sorry.
May I make one observation? I was delighted to listen to you, and I've been waiting for long. I did a workshop with Rivera Sen, and she taught me this Gandhian process. Very nice you came in here and did this. We do some work in that space. Thank you. Thank you, Lester.
Thank you.
Phenomenal. Suzanne, you're next.
Well, I loved that presentation, the thought of the concept, the structure of nonviolence, and I really, really want to take your course on blues and social change. My question for you and comment, one of my passions is prevention of armed conflict. And one of the things that makes that so hard is just the natural human tendency to pay more attention when there's a serious, when there's blood flowing, basically. If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if there's something in there about the culture of nonviolence or the rituals, or I don't know what it is, institutions. You know, how do we get ourselves first and everyone else to pay more attention when there are mass nonviolent movements going on, when people are expressing their grievances, maybe angrily, maybe in a really confrontational way that might put some of us off, but still peacefully. Because that's when we need to be acting. That's when we need to be paying attention and not waiting for the blood to spill. And I think it's all of us. We could blame the media, but it's not just the media. It's our natural attention goes more to when there's violence. What do you think?
Lester, you may, I want to share something and then you can talk on this. I'm in the middle of a book and I have some authentication that 85% of our thoughts daily are negative, 90% are repetitive. So 85% of every thought we have daily is negative.
Uh-huh.
The floor is yours.
Wow. Oh, this is an easy one. Yeah. Wow. Wonderful question. And I appreciate your input on that too, Jim. Yes. Wow. Thank you, Suzanne. You know, it's actually, my wife's a journalist and she, you know, she looks at, she does social media and so she gets the numbers, right? You know, how many people looked at this yesterday, this post, that post. And it's all bleeding and leading, right? Mostly. Although she's done some really neat things with, like she followed some people when the conflict, when the war in Sudan broke out. She had a WhatsApp group of people in Sudan, you know, sort of, and kind of following what people were doing. And there were some really neat positive things going on that actually got some attention. We're kind of an attention deficit, right, of positive things. So, I mean, we could talk about how we do it individually, you know, how we can make our lives more positive, right? This like the acts of random kindness kind of idea that people, you know, sometimes would kind of scoff at that.
Gratitude practices.
Yeah.
Expressing appreciation.
Yes, right. You know, I mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh earlier. And there's a great interview that Oprah did with Thich Nhat Hanh. And I also had I interviewed the Dalai Lama about Gandhi when I was in India doing research on him, and you know, that one of the things that was so amazing, when I walked from the waiting room into this hallway. Door opened up and the gentleman said, "Come." I walked in and the Dalai Lama, instead of sitting behind his desk back in his office, which is, you know, the usual practice when I did interviews with people, he was there in the hallway waiting for me. And he, you know, was like massaging my arm and says, "Oh, thank you for coming all this way to see me." I thought, like he was acting like I had like given him a great favor. But then the thing that most amazed me, I spent about 45 minutes with him. It was like he had nothing else to do except sit there and talk with me. He was like totally focused. It was very different from a lot of the interviews I did in India. I mean, there were people coming and going, there were phone calls and people would come here and there, and there were always lots of movement and commotion and chaos. And, but with him, it was like, and I thought, this is because of meditation, right? Years of meditation and mindfulness. And of course, so I totally changed my lifestyle. And ever since then, I've been totally mindful. Well, no.
It's a process.
Yeah. But I do think about it now and then. And I do try to focus more on the positive. So of course, then the next step is how do we scale that up, right?
Catherine?
I don't have my hand. My hand keeps
Oh,
coming
Pat?
down. Yeah, I think
don't-
you were probably next.
Montana,
Yeah. I
yeah,
don't know what
and
happens.
John. Go
Maybe
ahead.
it's a time frame. But thank you so much. And there are two things that I just discovered that we have in common. I don't know if you know Dr. James Hunt. He wrote a lot of books on Gandhi. He was a very close friend of mine. Passed away, and
Yeah.
you might want to check his books, American for Gandhi and some other one. He was in London. He wrote books. And the other thing that the slide that you just showed, a friend of mine in Georgia did that actually. With the different religions.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, a friend of yours did that. Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's so amazing.
I have a question because I've been kind of wondering. I've been in this country now 54 years. And I remember 1970 when we had Earth Day. So it's going to be right now actually 55 years. And also the peace education forums, I remember in the 70s we used to go to, a lot of seminars and in-person stuff. But I'm wondering, why is it that we have a lot of intellectual activity about peace and environment, yet in the last 54 and 55 years, the environment got worse and violence has increased, even in the United States, because I know the difference between 1971 and now. So why do you think that the intellectual activism is not translating in practice in society so that we are not evolving in the right direction? Thank you.
Wow, you folks ask such easy questions. Oh my. Wow, yeah, that's actually I have a friend of mine just recently retired, and he was actually one of my colleagues at University of Texas, and he was like one of these real public intellectuals. He wrote a lot of editorials. He got stuff published everywhere, all kinds of newspapers. And he posted this thing on Facebook one day. He said, I'm kind of like, after he'd retired, I'm kind of like thinking like I wasted my whole career. I thought, of course, everybody jumped in and said, oh, no, of course not, of course not. But it is, we're just talking about this problem of negativity, right? Right? Here we go. It is, it does seem like, when we have so much wisdom about all this, and so much scholarship, and so much good action. And actually, I put that in my preface to my encyclopedia. I said, why is it that we have so much good scholarship on violence and so much violence? And I think, part of it is we just sort of we have to pick our niche and do what we can. It's sort of in, Gandhi's idea, which he got from the Buddha, right, and some other places, of non-attached action. This was his takeaway from the Bhagavad Gita, the war story. In Bhagavad Gita, he tried to turn it into a lesson for nonviolence. Non-attached action, you do the right thing. What happens out of all your action is not your responsibility. These are all these forces that are bigger than us. We do the right. Somebody came up to me after nuclear threat class one day and said, do you really think we're gonna avoid a nuclear war? I said, I don't know, but I know if the bombs start falling, I'll know I've been trying to keep it from happening. So I guess that's all we can do. Have some I'm kind of a congenital optimist. I feel like, okay, because Dr. King said it's either nonviolence or non-existence, right? Those are the choices. So I'm hopeful that humanity is gonna figure out how to get past all this violence. Or else we'll just kill ourselves off and the cockroaches will take over. But I happen to believe that, but that's a faith thing, I guess, right?
Yeah. Catherine, I believe your hand was up first.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
Oh.
thank you so much, Les, for all of this. I know, like, I've learned so much from you over the years, and
Oh, same
again,
here.
this
You.
this time frame is not nearly enough to talk about everything you've done and studied, but it was great to hear parts of it, or get into a lot of it. I've got two kind of questions and comments. One is I was just looking today at your Women, War, and Violence book that you and Miriam, I guess, co-edited. So you mentioned women toward the end, but if you could just say a little bit more about your work with the important role of women, in peace
Yeah.
processes and nonviolence, leadership, all of that. And then also just kind of another not easy question, but I've been watching, as USAID has been targeted now, almost completely dismantled, which I think in my worst dreams, I didn't imagine we'd get here within a month. But, I think it's, although it's not perfect and there was some waste, et cetera, it's still a very small part of our national budget, less than 1% of our aid dollars. And it was such an important model around the world in many places of, not having the military leadership and using violence and force, but using, soft diplomatic power to reach people, to help with poverty, all the structural and some of the cultural violence things that you brought up. And we know, like I've been talking to Simon, many of our Solidarity 2020 Beyond activists and peace builders that I work with are directly impacted. They've had the HIV/AIDS programs stopped. They've had money for women's clinics in informal settlements stopped. They've had money for people in Burma and Myanmar that are starving in camps stopped, all within a couple of weeks. And now 10,000 employees they're fired and bringing back from overseas that are, US, that are doing really good work, many of them. So just any kind of sense about, again, I know people are trying to push back, but I just see that as such a very sad thing that's happening right now at a time when we really need that, that soft diplomacy and peaceful look from the US, and that has just been dismantled, I think is really concerning.
Yeah, next question, please. Oh my, yeah, I mean, talk about the problem of negativity and negative thoughts. I've been fighting that lately. I'm sure. But we have to. Solidarity is the answer there, right? I mean, to use the name of your organization, the wonderful name of your organization, that we do have to keep each other close during all this, and we need women, right? We need more women. I mean, there is the Margaret Thatcher problem. That doesn't always work to have more women, and we know that it's harder, if you have, my the day after the election, I was trying to figure out what to say in class, right? And without just sounding like a partisan hack. But so I talked about intersectionality. That the idea of how race, gender, and class come together is a really powerful concept. It comes out of African American sociologists. Race, gender, and class. So if you have race and gender against you, you're already within given the existing power structure, you have two strikes already against you. So the fact that that the woman running for president got the brown woman running for president got almost as many votes. We forget that she got almost as many votes as popular votes, like real votes, as the guy who won. And we definitely need more women. I mean, there's some studies about that, right? That you put women in diplomacy, a big push to get more women involved in diplomacy. When I was at the conference where I met my wife 26 years ago in Dar es Salaam is a conference on globalization. And I was talking to one of the organizers of the conference, and she was talking about the need, and I was commenting on the fact that conference, all the leadership of the conference is women. And I thought, wow, I was really impressed with that. And she said, well, women in the traditional family, women are raised, they're taught to look out for the the needs of everyone in the family. And so they're taught from the time they're young girls to balance the needs of the various family members, to make sure everybody gets as much as they can, their needs, especially if there's scarcity in the family. The other thing that women are taught to do from the time they're young girls is to save some of the resources for tomorrow. She said, those are the kinds of skills that we need to have women in public institutions, corporations, politics, and government. We need those skills in the public arena, and that's really stuck with me. That really impressed me. So I think, a lot, the stuff on, you increase the economy by getting women involved, training women, educating women, the economy goes up. I mean, there's a lot of good evidence, the importance of getting women, of empowering women. And there's been some recognition of that, I think. A long ways to go. I mean, it's still not very far. Okay. It gets a start of an answer.
Barbara Gunmuller.
Thank you so much. I've really appreciated all of your research, and I do podcasts, and I've been interviewing over 150 peacemakers. And I just did a podcast with a couple, and the couple found a new map for relationships, creating the love at home and peace on the planet. And you hit it several different ways. You talked about the Dalai Lama being totally present and being with you. And then you talked about women, and I think women should be at every peace table. But this book made a point that in our relationships at home, as you were talking about women saving things and taking care of things, our relationships at home teach us how to be tolerant if we can learn to be open to the moment and not judgment. But anyway, if you have a moment, listen to peacepodcast.org and listen to this Stanford professor, Martin Hellman, and Dorothy. Dorothy was the reason why they were able to talk about world problems, because they weren't so busy arguing and finding fault with each other. They learned so many of the moments that we need. And in fact, it started as a journey and then of unbearable pain. And then in the interplay between the personal struggle and that of the nations of the world as they grapple with global challenges in the survival in this nuclear age, it was just an unbelievable. And so all of a sudden I realized maybe it is our personal relationships with others, and we are the peace maybe other people need. But they had one thing they had to do. They had to agree that they were not going to find fault with each other. First, they were going to be, as the Dalai Lama was with you, present.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that does anything for you, Lester, but it sure helped me pay attention.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Well, who's that? Oh, you see this? My wife is actually a lot smarter than I am. I noticed the last time, just recently, I was with my wife together on Zoom, and so I'd put up a picture with both of us, and so I got on today. I thought, oh, that's still both of us in the picture. I mean, it's easy for me because my wife is so much wiser and smarter than I am. Well, Catherine knows her, so you can. I mean, she's too polite to say it probably, but she knows. The this is.
You're both great. You've got a great family,
oh,
actually. I love
thank
your
you.
family.
Um, I'll take a look for that podcast, but
Yeah, thank you.
you know, as a sociologist, I think it has to, you know, both from macro to micro and micro to macro, right?
Mhm.
It's easier to be peaceful if you live in a peaceful society, right? But a peaceful society is more likely if you're peaceful. Actually, you know, I'm a great fan of the concept of karma. And I tell you, it actually kind of goes back to the Dalai Lama. There was a group of Tibetan monks who came to Austin to do a cultural show, and they had a photographer with them. And I said, I could take my picture with the monks because I was with the Dalai Lama for 45 minutes. I did get my picture taken. And one of the monks says, oh, what's more important is your karma is intertwined with the Dalai Lama's. And I said, yes. This really helps my karma, right? But the more I thought about that, it's kind of good sociology, right? Because every thought, word, and deed has consequences, and so and then they ripple out. Or one lama told me it's like a tree. You know, if you plant a seed of compassion, it bears fruits of compassion, so it multiplies, right? If you plant a seed of harm, that multiplies. It bears harmful fruit. And so there's a sense in which, you know, it's a lot like you know, some of the earlier research on like peer groups and relationships and so on, social psychologists have done. But there's and again, this is kind of like what we can all do, right? Because we're constructing the world we live in. And so I think it really does have consequences. I mean, look at, I mean, Jesus only had 12, right? And we have more than that here. So this is a pretty powerful group right here. You know, that we can, and our acts of compassion are going to multiply. And some other people's acts of harm are going to multiply too. So we have to confront and resist. Yeah.
We're going to create a bigger tipping point than the other side sooner or later. We are growing in numbers. As I was listening to your nonviolence, how to analyze your nonviolence programs, one of the things that comes to mind, and maybe John German, if he wants to speak on it, but Peace by 2030 is a program that develops exactly what you were talking about.
Huh.
The one-on-one relationships, Barbara Mueller, you know, how you start with the one-on-one relationships and build from there. Actually, you start in the heart and grow out. And we are growing out farther and farther. But as we grow out, let's make sure our heart stays grounded in love and peace.
Yeah.
Time for one more question.
I just want to thank you, Jim. You bring the best speakers. I never miss your program because I always learn something. So Lester, you gave me some models today that I hadn't really thought about. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lester, this has been phenomenal. The other question I get a lot, would anybody have access to your PowerPoint? They were powerful.
Yeah, no, I'd be glad to share them. Yeah.
If you're willing to share them to me, I will share them with anybody who likes. They will have my email. I'll be happy to do that because it's that great reminder to look for the good. We have a choice which way we want to look at any time of the day. We can look at the sun, we can look down and see dirt in the ground. What do we want to see and where do we want to look? So Lester, you have guided us immensely. I love it. I love it.
Oh, thank you. This has been great opportunity. I wish we had another 2 or 3 hours.
Well, and we all do, except for the fact that these Thursday moments are a monthly reminder to keep working and moving forward.
Yeah.
We can't solve it all in 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
But we
Hey, Mike,
can remind us to keep going.
How
and
many of
keep
you are
them.
going to Calgary? How many of you are going to Calgary for Rotary? I'm curious about that.
I'll be going to Calgary.
I want to meet all of you. So let's all meet in Calgary. Let's have a conversation in Calgary and meet in the Peace Pod in the
I'll
middle.
put that together, Barbara.
I'm serious. This is a good time for us to really be together. Thank you.
Well,
And it's
that's
that togetherness, yes, and let's hold hands, particularly in a time like we're in. But
Yes.
Lester, we are indeed grateful for the work you do, for the information you bring to us, and we all thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and expertise with us. But I want to talk about next week. We're excited to hear from Dr. Frances Flannery. She's a scholar, teacher, and activist, quite a phenomenal lady. Speaking of bringing women into peace, who is interested in the relevance of biblical and religious studies for peace building. Some of her education and advocacy is in the environment, which you'll hear more about that, founding the nonprofit BioEarth. A full bio you will have Monday morning. Lester, we indeed thank you immensely.